Hi,
Hi.
welcome to our book club.
Thank you so much. You guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, a little out of practice with my Zoom skills here.
I was gonna say, thanks to the pandemic, I think we all became experts.
Yeah, I know. Although I was going like, have I done this before? And then also, I feel like I want to get ahead of this if you guys can see my background. And if you're wondering if this is a woman's leg, it is. I'm actually in a hotel room and it has like half naked women on the wall. So I'm like, oh,
Oh,
perfect. Like just the image I wanted to present on Zoom. So if you're distracted, that's what's happening there.
all right. Does anybody have the book? We're gonna take our screenshot really fast, and then we'll dive right in. All right, guys, 1, 2, 3. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for being with us. I absolutely positively loved this book. I have to say, my favorite movie growing up was You've Got Mail, and it felt very reminiscent of it. Like I was just obsessed. I know I wrote you as soon as I literally finished it. I'm like, I could reread that probably anytime things get stressful, which is what I did with You've Got Mail. I was telling them earlier, I babysat for a family, and every Friday night for a year, I watched You've Got Mail to the point where they were like, do you want this VHS? We have cable. Do you not know how to work the TV? And I'm like, I love this movie. And so I loved everything about this because of it just felt like that. It felt familiar to me and just absolutely delightful.
I love that. And you're talking my language because I was the same way. Actually, a lot of romantic comedies, I will confess to being on repeat. But that's one, there's just something like so comforting about it. And like the chemistry and being a reader, just loving that book world. But actually, because I loved it so much and because I knew, like I always kind of knew I wanted to tell my version of that type of story. But and I'd known that for years. And actually this book was contracted, I think, for probably the publisher had bought it like 2 to 3 years before I actually got around to writing it. And I intentionally like made myself go on a You've Got Mail hiatus because I wanted to like as much as possible not get, too much overlap. So pretty much the second I turned in like the final version of the book, my husband knew, he's like, here's a glass of wine and here's You've Got Mail. And it'd been like I was coming home to my friends. So I
Aw.
absolutely know what you mean with the frequent watching.
I was gonna say, I knew I loved you. I'm like, that just confirms it.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So what was your inspiration for this one?
It really was. I kind of hate saying that because I get there's that like, oh, so she just wrote her own version of You've Got Mail. But I actually had, because I loved You've Got Mail so much back in the day, and You've Got Mail was based on the shop around the corner, which back when You've Got Mail came, I guess was the 90s. And I was not at an age where I knew a lot about classic movies, but like that was sort of like the first one where I'm like, well, what's the shop around the corner? And I remember like I made my mom go to like our little local video store, and you could tell the guy running the store was like, she wants what movie now? And he had to like dig it out of the back because it was so old. But so then I loved just knowing that there's this sort of timeless legacy of the story, of the idea of someone exchanging letters and then falling in love in real life. And then I went down the rabbit hole of, and I don't know if you guys read this, I'm probably redundant with my author note, but La Perfumerie, I'm probably saying it incorrectly. It's the Hungarian play. And I was like, oh, so that was the original. And it really was just sort of this, born out of my love for You've Got Mail. But like I said, it was this rabbit hole of the origin of this story. And I thought, you know what, like we need a version for our world, like we're email obviously still relevant, but it's different than it was in You've Got Mail. Letters are a little bit old fashioned. So it took a while to come up with the idea of like, how do I make it my own? And then how do I make it fit into, like our generation? And I was like, what about a dating app? So it was really trying to figure out, kind of almost like backing into that story of how can I make this fresh again? How can I make it, me? And then also, is there any way that this would happen in today's hyper connected world? And then that's where I admit, like, I was like, am I going to be able to sell the idea of a dating app where they don't see each other's faces? But as I was writing it, I was like, I like that idea for a dating app. Like I thought there was kind of something there. So that's the long-winded backstory of how it came about.
I have a bunch of questions, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance. I was like, it's because I absolutely positively loved it. I'm like, and we usually read a lot of thrillers. So everybody was excited that I peppered in something happy and hopeful and chick
Oh,
flicky because we
fun.
all read that too. So it was exciting to have like a change of pace.
I'm glad it was that for you guys, because it's definitely like I in general write romance novels. And then this was one that I think was even maybe more so towards the fluffy side of the romance. And that was actually pretty deliberate on my part, because this was written, like I said, I'd known for years that I was going to write it, but just the way the universe works, when it came deadline, it was smack dab in the middle of 2020. And I live in New York City, and it was sort of like epic lockdown there. Like, it was the type of thing where I had this book due, I hadn't really started, and I would take my dog for a walk, and it was bad enough, like sort of in my, the city in general, where cops would be like, if you're not a first responder, you're not supposed to be outside, like you were supposed to be in your apartment. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to write, this fluffy romance novel in the city in this particular time? So I got a little extension from the publisher, and they were great about it. I just said, I can't write a rom-com right now with all that's happening. But a couple months in, it was still 2020. It was maybe, I want to say it was like August. So still bad, still in lockdown. But I actually, by that point, had a desire to sort of escape. And I was like, well, maybe I'll create my own escape, and for myself and for readers, to just this very almost sort of like foamy world. Like, it's just so happy, and there's not a lot of problems in that version of New York in this book. And that was sort of intentional, I think, to provide almost, like Hallmark movies. They have that very,
That's what we said. I'm like, it felt like we stepped into a Hallmark movie, whereas like not usually our Lifetime or like dark thriller. This was like happy and hopeful, and it felt like turning on the Hallmark channel. And I'm like, that I needed that. I was like, that is something I needed when we started reading this.
I did. I'm glad to hear that, because like I said, I needed it as well when I wrote it. So I'm glad that maybe comes out a little bit.
Did you watch The Love is Blind?
No, actually, it's so funny you bring that up. So I'd known obviously all along, like, this inspired by You've Got Mail. And usually on the back cover copy, like the book description, usually I'll provide sort of a draft of that. But this particular publisher was like, oh, we'll write it for you. And I'm like, fine. And they came back and said, it's You've Got Mail meets Love is Blind. And I kid you not, I was like, what the heck is Love is Blind? And I hadn't been watching a lot of TV. I don't watch a lot of reality TV. So and I still haven't seen it, but I had to Google it. And I even checked in with my friends. I'm like, is this an app description? They're like, oh, it's perfect. It's perfect. So that's funny. Yeah, I've never seen it and didn't even know it existed.
Yeah, it's bad. It's good in that how bad it is. My husband and I watched it together, and it's real bad. I wish that they had kept the couples blind to each other much longer.
Oh, interesting.
I think the show, the reality show would have been a lot more interesting if they didn't let them see each other so quickly.
So it was more just sort of like the first impression was blind, but then
yeah, they come together, they talk to get to each other without seeing each other for a little bit, like maybe like 2 or 3 episodes, and then they're together, and it's all about now all of a sudden you're together, and I'm just like, well, that's not really blind.
It's like blind until they commit, essentially. Whereas like Married at First Sight, you marry a complete stranger at the altar, but you've never seen them. Have you seen? I'm like, you don't watch reality. I'm like, there's so much reality TV. I'm like, that kind of plays off.
I'm like, need to write this one down too.
In the book, yeah. So Married at First Sight, the whole premise is like you go through all this psychological testing and background, and then essentially you meet, and you've never seen each other at the altar, but it's your wedding day. She's walking down the aisle meeting him, and they've never seen each other, and so it causes chaos. And you know what I'm saying? Everything that marrying a stranger can be. They're partnered by psychologists, but it's like psychologists that are kind of setting it up for a TV essentially. So sometimes it's a good match, and sometimes it's not the best match. And sometimes you're like, why are they together?
Interesting. Yeah, no, my reality TV is sort of limited to, like, back in the day, a couple episodes of The Bachelor. And even that was just like blew my mind. I'm like, they've only known each other for like how long? And then they're getting married. Although then I look at my own books. Like I said, I entirely write romance, and I look at the time, I'm like, this is only taking place over 3 weeks, and he's proposing. I'm like, nah, we're going with it.
So if you had to pair your main characters with a wine, like Gracie and Sebastian, how would you pair them? Like, what would Gracie be? What would Sebastian be? What would some of the other, Kiva?
Man, I'm going to take such the easy answer here, and Gracie would for sure be champagne. And probably sort of like I think of her like a sweeter champagne, and you would think that I would remember all the research I had to do with champagnes, and I don't, but I want to say, no, I'm not going to know the name of the sweet champagne, but that would be Gracie. And then I think Sebastian would probably be, I almost would put him more as like a scotch or like a whiskey. But if he was a wine, probably like, like a red wine, and definitely one that's like kind of the opposite of Gracie. Like if there's a spectrum of like wine from like bubbly and sweet to maybe like a little bit more, I was like, what's the word for grumpy in wine? There we go. Yeah, kind of like a bold, not too sweet,
Yeah.
a spicy. Yeah, that's not quite right either. But yeah, definitely probably sort of a more understated red wine as opposed to Gracie's fruitier punch of a sparkling wine. And then the rest of them, like I instinctively want to put, her siblings also with champagne just because it's the family legacy. But I see probably more of like a Chardonnay, and then, ooh, also probably I'm gonna go with champagne for that whole family. And Kiva, man, she was one of my favorites to write. Can I say champagne again? No, because I have her like, red is sort of her trademark. I'm gonna go with red wine for her as well, but like a spicier, lighter version than Sebastian. So I'm going with, now I want wine, but
I was gonna say me too, actually.
I'm like, what time is it?
It's a 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, there you
Always,
go.
right?
So I know you're not like a sequels person, but would there ever be a Kiva and Grant story at some point?
Maybe. And I actually, that's one. So this book I actually had, I'm in general, I plan my books. Sometimes I wing it. This book in particular, because I think there were so many like nuances, it was very planned. Like I had a very detailed outline. But one thing that surprised me, because the rest of the book pretty much followed what I wanted the outline to be, but their relationship, I didn't even know where it came from, and it wasn't part of the plan, and I loved it. And there was actually a couple of times where I probably would have put more in there, and I'm like, no, like I don't want to like ruin the pacing. So definitely perhaps, and I don't say that very often, but they just had, I wish I would have brought him onto the page a little bit more, because in my head they just had so much chemistry. So definitely that is a possibility.
I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that because, like you said, you could tell it like it had that fun kind of spin-off ability to it.
Yeah, I think I probably like, I always kind of joke that sometimes, like, even though when I think I'm a planner, sometimes the muse, I swear, has this agenda, because I could almost like feel, I call my muse a girl. I could feel her like planting the seeds as I go along. Like it's like some part of me was planning ahead to have that possibility, even though I didn't quite know the story early on. But I also wanted to do, I think I would have liked to do like a little bit more of her cooking world, like the whole like catering business. And it was fun even when she was like taking over Gracie's kitchen and making all this food. But I'm wondering now if again the muse was looking out for me, because I'm like, well, that deserves its own book. Like I don't want to just like, shoehorn this little catering food business. But I'm like, well, that would be a fun. Most of my books are set in New York City, and I'm always sort of looking for like new angles and like new lifestyles. And I was like, I wonder what like the catering business is in New York, or even if it was like a celebrity, a celebrity chef, because there's a bartender at the place across the street from us, and we didn't know he had a second job. And he was like, oh, he's like, yeah, no, I sometimes like when Tom Hanks, and I'm forgetting his wife's name, fitting Tom Hanks and You've Got Mail. But anyway, when Tom Hanks is in New York, this bartender who we've known for years, he's like, oh yeah, I go over to his house and I cook his dinners. I'm like, what? Like that's a thing? So I could see Kiva getting into that business and me writing it. And then I would have to do some research.
I was gonna say, but what
That'd be
fun
fun.
research. I was gonna
Yeah.
say, even when you were talking about like the grilled cheeses she was making, I'm like, my mouth was watering. I'm like, there's so much potential there.
There is. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just, are you a Gracie kind of cook or a Kiva kind of cook?
I am probably a Gracie kind of cook, but my husband is actually a Kiva kind of cook. So he actually, some of those grilled cheeses, as I was writing, I was just making them up, I think, because I was hungry. And there's like, can you make me a grilled cheese? And it wasn't quite as fancy, but like he has this like grilled cheese down where he does like part on the stove and like butters it a certain way and finishes it in the oven and like cuts it a certain way. So I think there's probably parts of his chefness got into the plot a little bit. So I'm very lucky in that way. But yeah, I'm more of like when he's out of town, I bring out the Kraft macaroni, and that's is my favorite, but that's as fancy as I get. Yeah. Anything else? I can keep rambling at you guys, but if you have questions.
I was gonna say,
okay, is there a real Cannoli the cat?
No, there is a real story here. I have a dog named Bailey, but actually as I was like, where did I come up with cannoli? And I was remembering this girl that I had gone to grade school with, and I didn't really stay in touch with her very much, but we have a mutual friend. And I remember asking Sarah, I'm like, oh, how's Jill doing? And she's like, oh, good. Had twins, got married, whatever. And I just got a kitten named Cannoli. And this was years ago, but I remember thinking, I'm like, that is the best name for any kind of pet. And I think that just like, I must've like tucked it away into some part of my brain. Because when I was naming the pet, I'm like, oh, gonna go with Cannoli. But that's usually how it is. People always ask, like, do you get your inspiration from real life? And most of the time I say no, because I don't remember it. And then like later on, I'm like, oh, I did get that from real life. It's just tucked away in some little hidden pocket of my brain, apparently. So yes, Cannoli is a real cat, but not a cat that I have met.
Who was the most challenging character to develop? And you said Kiva was your favorite.
Kiva, yeah, just because she jumped off the page so much. She was definitely fun. I would say probably Sebastian, mostly because, and this was a lot of my books, I'll do both the female and the male point of view. And I knew for this one, I definitely didn't want to get too much inside of his head, because I really wanted readers along with Gracie to be wondering, like, what is he thinking? Like, what's going on in his head? And then also it was already a bit of it was a struggle. It was very difficult to sort of get the timing right and the letters or, the messages exchanged. And so the whole time I'm like, who exactly is Sebastian? Because he's fairly charming online as Sir, he's got like these quips, and then he's much more reserved, in real life, at least early on in the book. And so there was this question mark in my head, I think up until I got the first draft was sort of a big question mark. And then by the time I got into the second draft, I had to sort of figure out like, okay, is he like secretly really reserved and then his online persona is just different, or is it the other way around? And I think I finally landed on like, I think he's a little bit shy, like almost a little bit Mr. Darcy-esque, which is a cliche comparison, but that's sort of, I think, what I came down to of, okay, he does want to be the Sir that he is, that's charming and funny and, likes to talk about ice cream and sorbet or whatever. It just takes him a while to warm up in real life to get comfortable with someone. So I'm going to go with Sebastian. He was a struggle, and sometimes the quiet ones always are. Gracie, she's so bubbly, and it's sometimes the more bubbly the character, the more they like talk in the back of my head. So I know everything that they're thinking because they tell me. Whereas Sebastian, if he's more reserved on the page, that also means he's very, very stubborn back there with the muse. So that took a while, I think, to get right, or to try to get right.
Did you ever think Sir was going to be anybody but Sebastian?
No, that was one thing that stayed pretty clear in my head. The one thing I did toy around with is, and this was another one, I think it was probably like up until the final stages where my publisher was like, okay, we need the book. It was tricky for me to try to figure out at what point in the story did Sebastian learn the truth? Because I know Grace, I knew from the beginning, like just from like sort of like the tension of the overall novel, like we can't have her find out until the end. It's the same way You've Got Mail and Shop Around the Corner. It's the same thing. You sort of have to do that to maintain that tension so that readers are still interested. But I'm like, well, did he know, did he know like all along? Did he know halfway through? And originally I had him finding out sooner than he did. But that was that was harder to pull off, I think, in a book. It's one thing in You've Got Mail where you can see what Tom Hanks is doing, Joe Fox is doing sort of behind the scenes, and he's got that sort of fun of devious manipulation of her a little bit. But I also didn't want to copy that part of You've Got Mail, which is why I decided to have him find out a little before Gracie, but sooner than I'd originally planned.
I liked him being there at the end, like when she's getting ready for her art gallery opening and he's giving her pink roses and like she's not putting two and two together. And I'm like, come on, Gracie, you can do it. You can figure it out.
Wager.
Yeah. Writing down basically a description of himself essentially. And I was like, all right, I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, that was probably one of the most challenging parts of the book. This book in general, I'd say it was my favorite one that I've written. And in some ways it was thus the easiest, but it was also so hard just logistically, especially like writing those, having them sort of fall in love in real life, but not too fast because they were also falling in love with someone else, on this other platform, and trying to figure out how to juggle that. But the biggest thing was like, how do I keep this a secret without having Gracie look like to be harsh, an idiot, because like there's so many signs. And luckily my editor, I brought this up to my editor early on, and she was really great about saying, okay, like here's a point where you're being a little too obvious that, they should know by this point. So throw in some point of confusion. And that's why I very intentionally, they originally had bonded over having each lost a father. And that's why I introduced that whole thing with Gracie meeting his parents. And she makes the assumption that that's his biological father and it's actually his stepfather. And that allowed me to at least it felt a little bit like a cheat, but I'm like, it works. It gave Gracie sort of a way to not then immediately know, like, oh, okay. Because, if it's not like, oh, he shares so much in common with him and he lost his father, that gave me
window of
a
doubt. Yeah, just enough. Yeah, that carries it on. I liked that a lot.
Thanks.
Are you working on anything right now that you can tell us about?
Yes. So I haven't really mentioned this publicly at all. I've been taking a little bit of time off from I say Lauren Layne, like the book world, just to figure out sort of what I want to do next. I used to write, and the biggest caveat really is I used to write really steamy romance. To Serve with Love is, not steamy at all. And that's what I prefer to write. I'm realizing, I would like to lean in that direction, but publishers are definitely not as into that. They want the steamy, and also it sells quite a bit better. So I'm trying to figure out, do I want to do different pen name maybe, where I'm able to write stuff that's less steamy, or maybe even a different genre. So that's been sort of a question mark. But the one thing I do know for sure is actually my husband and I, kind of on a whim, a few years ago, wrote a screenplay for a romantic comedy. And it got picked up, which was very exciting. Hopefully we'll be getting made. But then my agent, she's like, well, I wonder if we could sell the rights to the novel. And sure enough, she sold the rights to the novel. So I'm actually doing it backwards. My husband and I are writing a novel based on a screenplay, and that we're on the finishing stages. It's actually due yesterday. So we'll be turning it in a couple of days late, but that's been my world for a little while, is trying to learn how to write with my husband.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Is it still kind of the rom-com? So it's the rom-com genre still, and what's
It's still
writing with somebody versus writing solo? Obviously your husband, which is
exactly. It is actually an idea that I'd had sort of like before I knew, like, hey, I'm going to write it with him. It was one that kind of came from my idea notebook that I'd meant to write. It's a Christmas, again, that Hallmark kind of vibe. It's sort of a Christmas inspired story. And then as I was trying to write the book, I'm like, well, I wonder, I just kept seeing it as a movie, and he and I had talked about wanting to try a screenplay. I'm like, why don't we just try this? It was like a fun little trial experience to do that. So it is very much sort of like in vein with the rest of my stuff. I don't know if you guys know Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, that Steve Martin. It's that essentially, except with an ex-husband and an ex-wife. It's called Emergency Contact, and she forgets to update her emergency contact information right before Christmas, gets a concussion. He gets called to the hospital. They haven't seen each other in years. They did not part amicably. And basically she has to either spend Christmas in the hospital because of the concussion, or go along with her, because she can't be alone, so she doesn't fall asleep and all those kind of cliche things. But then they end up going to Chicago together. So yeah, it's a fun little, again, it's not steamy, which I like. So it's very, very much romantic comedy.
How did you go from like marketing and website work to writing?
I think I'd always wanted to be the writer ever since I was really, really little. And so, but I just didn't really have the guts. And also my parents are very much like, they're a nurse and a doctor. So like romance novel was not on their list of like, this is, like a responsible career decision, not at all. So they, I got a political science degree. I was planning to go to law school, didn't do that. And then I needed to pay the bills. So I kind of fell into the marketing and the e-commerce world, just as like I thought that's what people did in their 20s, but the desire to write a book was always there. And I kind of dabbled with it in my early 20s just because it was the dream. And then finally, I think I was like 26-ish, 28-ish. And I just realized, I'm like, you know what? Like I'm sick of wanting to write a book and not actually trying it. So I kind of made myself go through the very painful process of learning how to write a novel. And then right around, this is a really long-winded answer to your question, but right around the time that I'd finished the book and I wasn't really loving my job, my husband got a job offer in New York City, which required me to quit my job at the time. So we moved to New York. I just finished the book. And then as I was looking for, like a real job here in the city, I actually ended up getting an agent and a couple book deals. So that was sort of one of those things. It was kind of like planned, but not planned. And I think probably if I could like go back again, I would be like, Julia Quinn, who very early on in her 20s figured out like, nope, I want to be a romance novel, and quit med school and did that early on. I think that's probably where my heart and my head was at. It just took me a little while to get the courage.
Did anybody else have any other questions?
Does Caleb ever settle down?
He does. Yes. He actually, I was like, how do I make him yeah, he does eventually. I will say that. He was one of those where he was like so fun and so sort of like flirty. And I almost love the idea of like his sisters trying to consistently like pair him up with someone and him refusing. But I think just because like I'm a romantic at heart, I'm like, nope, he needs his happily ever after too. So yeah, in my head, everybody in that entire book have like this very like fairy tale bow on their story.
I like the fairy tale ending, especially with the whole
Mhm.
Cinderella slipper signature. Like, I loved everything about this book. I've got to say, it made my heart so happy.
Thank you. Yeah, I did. I admit I laid the fairy tale thing on thick, but like I said, it was 2020 and I wanted to just like have a fluffy little, almost like a snow globe type of environment for just a couple months. So that was my little joyous escape.
How did you pick Bubbles, the champagne shop, for the legacy?
Oh, that was actually, I feel like that's another one that I sort of backed into for plot purposes. And I really wanted / needed, sorry if you guys hear squeaking, that would be my dog. I felt like I wanted and needed something that would be maybe have been successful when it was started in like the 80s, but would be struggling later on. And it just kind of came, like I said, I live in Manhattan myself, and there are so many little wine shops all around. And a couple of the guys that we go, we try to like support the local ones. And a couple of them have said like, oh yeah, it's getting harder because everybody now expects to be able to buy the wine online and have it shipped, and everybody expects delivery. And he was just saying everything's been getting so much more expensive. Whereas even just, 5-10 years ago, nobody expected their wine to be delivered, or, like that you could buy it online. You just went to the wine shop. And I was like, oh, well, that would be, like that's an area of New York living that's evolving just because of e-commerce. And there's a couple huge wine store, like almost like you can't imagine warehouses in New York City. So not quite warehouses, but they're relatively large structures considering it's a huge city that are just stocked with wine. And of course they're, it's like the Amazon and Walmart story where they're able to just offer such better prices. So I was thinking that would be a good environment for a business that was struggling. And then to make it even more so, I was like, well, what if it was so specific? What if it was a champagne shop? Because I would have an even more difficult time, I think, surviving in 2020 in New York City.
I love that Gracie is an artist. I also paint. I oil paint, and I'm a graphic designer by trade. So I was going to say, I think there is just some things about it that I felt particularly close to.
I love it. Yeah, I dabble. My mom is a very good painter. She loves watercolor, which is I sort of went in that direction. Actually, I'll hit you up later. I've recently bought some acrylic paints, and I'm so excited. I don't know where to start, but I'm like,
oh my gosh, please do. I'm like, keep in touch. I like love you. I'm like, emailing back and forth has been so much fun, and then reading this book was amazing. I'm like, so seriously, keep in touch.
Oh, well, I would love to. I would absolutely love that. And yeah, painting. I'm definitely not good at it, but this was definitely like a Gracie's art was, I think, what I sometimes wish when I dabble with art that I could do. And I'm not even remotely close to like finishing something, much less selling it. But that was born out of my own, like in another lifetime, I would create this sort of like fun fairy tale-esque New York watercolors.
And I like how she found it in the park. And I like that her brother was the one that like brought home the supplies for her to like kind of encourage that, that love and the direction that she had. There's so much of this book that just made my heart happy.
I love that. Thank you for all the compliments. And honestly, I like, there's so many authors that say they couldn't possibly choose a favorite book and I'm not one of them, I'm like, oh no, I could tell you all my favorites. And for sure, To Serve with Love is at the top of the list. So I was thrilled that you guys picked this one to read and I have a chance to talk about it and that you guys liked it.
When they had the comparison of You've Got Mail on the back, I was like, oh yeah, it's done. Like everybody's going to have to read this
No
one
more.
because my heart needs it. So, and then reading it, it felt so good. I was like, I think we've all got some heavy stuff going on right now, or a few of us do. And it was just a nice light break that I really think we all needed.
Good. That makes me genuinely happy. That's why I have to say, that's why I write what I do every now and then. And my dad, God bless him, neither of my parents is into romance or like into that particular world. They don't even really read that much fiction. And my dad's always like, well, when are you going to write your opus, Loey? He calls me Loey. And I'm like, what? I don't even know what an opus is, Dad. And, you know, like a treaty on butterflies, something that's sort of like your legacy. And I love that that's his perspective. I'm like, no, I think my legacy is going to be like the fun and fluffy stuff. Just someone's got to write it. The little, like you said, when you're in a rough patch in life and you want a place to escape to, that's what I try to create.
And I think that's exactly what this was. Like, I couldn't wait to get back to it when I was like stressed out or something wasn't going well, or you know what I'm saying? I've got some health stuff going on. I'm like, okay, I want to go back to this. Like, I was sitting waiting for results at the doctor's office on Friday and I had my earphones in because I was listening and I'm like, this is good. This is okay. We're going to be fine.
Good.
Oh yeah. Yeah. On Friday, I had 6 clients back to back to back. I work in a trauma field, a sexual trauma field. And so I got home and I was like, oh my gosh, I just need to not focus on anything else. And my husband poured me a bath and I got in and I read the book all the way through. It was great. It was wonderful. It was a great end to my week. So nice.
We were on vacation. We had a week off from school. So my husband and I and the 3 kids went up to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee for a few days. And I had started the book when everybody went to bed. And the next day I'm like, all right, I have like 47 pages left. So you need to give me like 45 minutes and I'll be done. And so my daughter starts trying to talk to me and I look at her and went, 22 pages. Come on, just leave me alone. I need to finish this. And it was wonderful. It was just such a joy to read.
Oh, thank you.
It really was.
Thank you so much. But I know that last minute when you see how many pages, you're like, please.
Yes.
Like, I need
like just don't talk to me. Just don't talk to me. I'm not here. I'm gonna go lock myself on the balcony. Just leave me alone.
I don't have kids, but like I said, I have the dog, and sometimes she'll be like giving me that look in the last chapter. I'm like, I'm so sorry, you're gonna have to hold it. I know you don't know what that means, but hold it.
Yeah, my dog too. I'm like, I think we're all animal lovers here, so we can all relate.
Love it. Yeah, you guys have been so fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Like I said, and I do not want to overstay my welcome. So any other questions? And then I can let everybody get back to their Sunday. Nothing. All right. And if you guys do have anything, feel free to email me. Like I said, I would love to keep in touch about painting and anything else. But yeah,
Please
I'm always
do. I was gonna say, I'm excited about the book that you wrote with your husband.
I can't wait.
If you do another sequel to Sister with Love, even though that's not what you do, we're reading it. I'm in. We've got our support.
on my list.
Like, sold. Please remember us. I know you don't do arcs, but if you will and you could, we would eat it up in a heartbeat.
All right, you guys, you could my beta readers, which I would likely need for that one. So I'll keep you guys in mind.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness, please write it. We will read it. We will devour it.
Awesome. Awesome. Was that even a word people use? Awesome.
Always.
That wasn't like my final thing. We just strike it from the record.
It's a fantastic word.
Oh, I like it. It's nice and happy. Who doesn't need some happy?
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I will let you go. Like I said, any follow-up, feel free to email. But yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Lauren. This was wonderful.
Bye.
All right, bye.